presents Scratch a Track,
the podcast where we debate which track to scratch off some of the most known and unknown albums of all time.
We live in an era of singles.
This is an album.
People no longer listen to an album for the work it truly is.
It kind of defines a band.
It's just not something that people relate to nowadays.
We've all gotten the dreaded.
It started out as a game.
Which track on the album would you scratch out if you had to? Hello everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Scratch a Track presented by the Dude and Grimm Show. I am the Dude, and with me as always is Grimm. How we doing there, Mr. Grimm?
I'm doing well. I'm ready to talk some albums, Duder.
Oh, we're gonna get the let out, buddy. This is our first time.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that. You know, thinking back to it, I got a lot of let out in high school. I guess you could take that a lot of ways. In this way, I mean, I just listened to the shit out of Led Zeppelin.
Yeah. Well, we're actually, I think, choosing an album that people are familiar with, but probably not the one people would pick first.
Which I like.
Which you like.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think naturally people would gravitate to Zeppelin IV, or actually the untitled album. Right. It was a billion things.
But for us, it was either between 3 or Physical Graffiti. And I think it's good we chose 3. It's a single album, and I think it's, we'll talk about, somewhat of a departure from what they had done prior to that point.
Yeah. I don't know. We're just not quite ready for the double album yet. I mean, actually,
we'll get
think
there.
We're ready. I don't know if
I don't know I don't know if everyone else is ready. Yeah, I could. Every band I've been in, you could say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So, all right, here we go. Led Zeppelin III, released in 1970. First 2 albums were pretty big. Were big hits, and there was definitely a progression from, I think, the popularity of Zeppelin 1, and then you had Zeppelin 2, which had some really big hits on it with Whole Lotta Love. I think that was probably the biggest hit off that album. I mean, Ramble On was also there.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I would have thought Heartbreaker. I mean, Heartbreaker was just such a riff. Dude.
Well, then they had Heartbreaker and then Livin' Lovin' Made. Didn't they kind of go into each other?
Yeah. I mean, even the radio played them into each other, which says something, because the radio's notorious for hacking things up.
It does. But we're not here to talk about that one. We're here to talk about 3, so they were kind of building up to this, and the first two albums you could say were rock, more rock, harder rock, and this one for them was a little more of a departure, and I think it threw people for a loop a little bit.
I would absolutely agree with that. And one thing that I think is interesting is just the sheer irony that the first song on this album, despite the fact that you're absolutely correct, and the rest of the album is a lot more acoustic and a lot more, I don't want to say tame, but I mean, it has elements of folk, and it has a lot of other stuff in it. But the first song, Immigrant Song, is arguably the hardest song they had released up to this point. That would be my argument.
Yeah.
I mean, with that like kind of primal scream in the beginning, I mean, that was one of those songs that like I heard before I even knew who Led Zeppelin was, and I was like, I don't know what band that is, but that is badass. You know, like
Yeah, that's one and we'll get into the songs obviously, but that is the only way I think you can describe that sound. It is a primal scream, and Robert Plant is the only person who can do that. There is that rip-off band now that sounds just like Led Zeppelin, but it's still only Robert Plant.
Yeah, agreed. And he could probably only do that for like a certain span of years, because I'm pretty sure as they continue to go on tour, that became harder and harder to get into that range.
Sure.
It's like ripping your vocal cords apart.
Yeah, and we'll get into definitely more of, his voice and singing ability, because he, on some of these songs, he lets his range go. It's pretty pretty impressive.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
but yeah, this album definitely, it does have blues elements to it, and it does have some folksy stuff, and there is a little bit of rock, but it is more acoustic, and
Yeah.
I think that it was, from my understanding, the critics, it was it sold very well because it was, at that point, it was Led Zeppelin, but I think critics were mixed on it just because of the acoustic sound. I think it confused people. They didn't look at it as more of an evolution, but I think they were looking at it as what the hell is this band doing? We thought we knew what we were getting, and especially when you release a song as the main single, like Immigrant Song, typically people are going to be like, well, the rest of the album is going to be similar. So I think it did confuse people a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that. I think it's great because, I mean, any band worth their salt is going to evolve, and they most certainly did that with this record.
Sure. So getting in a little bit to the, it wouldn't even say the recording, but just kind of the writing process. They had been on tour for a while. I think they got back from a North American tour, and Page and Plant, just themselves, because they were, I mean, John Paul Jones and John Bonham, both, they talk about, contributed a lot more to this album than the previous two. But again, Page and Plant were the main, I think, creative driving forces when it came to actually writing and the structure of the songs. And so Page and Plant, they got away to this cottage that Robert Plant, when he was a child with his family, grew up going to this cottage, and the name of his Bronny Orr. And it's just small cottage on the Wales countryside. There's no running water, no electricity. And Plant, his wife, and they had, I think, like an 18-month-old at the time.
Oh, geez.
Went there with Page's girlfriend and a few roadies. And if you actually search this online on Wikipedia, you can see a picture of the actual cottage. It's not like they were in some luxurious.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Place.
It's fairly. It's primitive. It'd be like going to my family's cabin.
Sure, and especially with no running water and electricity, I imagine they went up there with a couple of acoustic guitars. And the stories that I hear is they would just kind of play, and they'd walk around, and they'd go down and into like the valleys, and there was all these on the countryside, these panoramic views, and they wrote a bunch of songs. And there's 3 songs that they wrote during this process that made it onto this album. That would be Friends, Bronny Your Stomp, and then That's the Way, which are of course, the 3 of the main acoustic songs on the album. There were some other songs that were written that would later come on their later albums, like Over the Hills and Far Away, The Rover, and Down by the Seaside. So, then they got into the record. They got into the actual recording of it, and that's when they bring in Bonham and John Paul Jones, and like a lot of bands do, they did some in the studio, but we've seen bands do this where they get a house.
Well, and I think that's interesting too, because they got some mansion, and then they brought in the Rolling Stones mobile recording studio, and which I think is awesome, because they didn't confine themselves to some place in London or whatever. They just kind of went out into the country, and they use this mobile studio, and it's I think it makes for a great sound, and really a great album, just purely based on the fact that they can get out of wherever they're at the time and just go into this environment, and that's where they are and what they're doing. And the amount of outside influences are much more limited. Yeah,
and that's something we've seen in the past. I mean, we saw Radiohead do that, like with OK Computer, but that's something it seems like a lot of bands do after they have their first couple albums, and I think they're at that time they're probably enamored by the studio and are more into recording in that atmosphere. And then as they kind of get their chops and get experience and become more comfortable with the recording process, they branch out a little bit, and they want something that I think they feel is a little more conducive to creativity and also just being comfortable.
Yeah, I think the comfort's like the biggest part of it, and just that the fact of being a little isolated and left alone, I'm sure takes off this pressure that you might otherwise feel.
Certainly. And yeah, I think I mentioned that other band members kind of expand. Well, John Paul Jones expanded his role, but they all took, I think, more of an active community, I guess, kind of approach to recording this album with creative input. And John Paul Jones, I mean, he had always played bass and everything, but on this album, he had like a variety of synthesizers. I think he plays mandolin, he plays double bass. He really kind of just did a little bit of everything, and that is to have someone in your band that can do that is it takes you in other ways, other areas that you would be able to go.
Yeah, for sure. And even in their previous albums, I mean, I know that he had played like organ on Thank You and
Sure.
some other stuff. I think he's really the unsung hero of that band because Page can rip a guitar apart and Plant can
in his sleep.
sing. Yeah, and Plant has this voice that's, undeniable and unmatched.
Yeah.
But I think that John Paul Jones is really the unsung hero of the band because he's the guy who you could turn to really put in about any part, and it's just going to be gold.
Yeah. Well, before we kind of get into, well, I guess the songs and a little bit of the production, I'm curious. Do you have this album on vinyl?
I do.
You do, and so everything I said was the cover is kind of crazy, and it has, at least the one that was initially released had certain holes and cutouts and things in it, so that way when you pulled the sleeve out, it showed like different pictures and everything. Is the I guess the version you have is, I mean, I imagine it's a reissue.
It
some
is,
sort.
and it's actually the recent remaster.
Okay.
So regretfully, I can say I don't know, and I actually haven't even opened it yet.
Ooh, wow. Okay. Well, from what I read, this is one of, I think, Jimmy Page's friends that he knew, who was some kind of artist or whatever. He actually designed it, and it had, it has a real psychedelic kind of look to
it does.
And everything. But the production of it was very, very involved and actually caused a 2-month delay.
No kidding.
And just releasing the album. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, because a lot of times, especially when you're a band of Led Zeppelin stature, they want to either get it out as soon as you can, or they have a specific time where they would really like to release it. And so, being delayed by 2 months probably, I'm sure didn't make I guess what Atlantic Records very happy. I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, and then are we going to talk about the production of the album itself? Because I believe this was the first one of their albums where Jimmy Page was credited as a producer, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I don't know if he produced. I mean, he may have produced the first two as well. I don't really know. I mean, I know they have engineers work on it, but him just being a musician in the band, what? Maybe you can explain that a little bit, or get into that. I will say that.
Yeah, his name is on the first, the previous two albums as being a producer as well. I think for him, I mean, he was in the Yardbirds before joining Led Zeppelin, right. And he was not the only famous guitarist in the Yardbirds. I don't know. Maybe people have heard of Eric Clapton.
I think so.
But either way, prior to even the Yardbirds, he was a big session musician. So I think that he kind of came up in a studio environment. So I don't think that any of this stuff was foreign to him. In fact, he was probably more at home in that environment than a lot of people would have been, especially people who just came out of a garage or something. So I would imagine for a guy like that, you know, he already knows the ropes, knows his way around the equipment. And it was probably quite easy for him to produce these albums, especially with a band like this where they distinctly know what sound they want. I mean, it's not like they went into the studio and needed somebody to tell them, like, this is like the kind of band you're going to be. This is how you're going to sound. I'm pretty sure they had that nailed down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that was kind of maybe sort of my question. I don't know if this is going to come out as a question, but it seems to me that, yeah, just like you said, they knew the sound that they wanted. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of bands out there that say, hey, this is the sound we want to have, but they don't know how to achieve it. It seems like Jimmy Page, he knew what sound they wanted, and he knew how to create that sound as well, right?
Yep.
I mean, that it seems to me that's kind of what it is.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of that was just the chemistry of that group. I mean, I don't think they really had to try. It was just you got them together, and this is what happened. And sure, maybe they changed their sound or they did this or they did that, but I tend to think that, like a lot of bands, when you have a couple of people who are like these driving creative forces, it's kind of like, you know, we've done this to this point, and now we want to do this. And people just they just kind of instinctively know what to do.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it does. And you know, that's not to say that they didn't have engineers and people on there helping out, but yeah, he not only was he an amazing guitarist, but he had a vision for what he wanted the songs and everything to sound like, and he knew how he was going to get it. So it's pretty pretty cool. So, well, I think it's about time we jump into the album here and start scratching away. So
yeah, that's fair.
You got your screwdriver ready, buddy?
Yeah, I do. I didn't get out the vinyl. I figure I'll wait and I'll let it play through and scratch on its own. But yeah, I got the theoretical screwdriver out.
Totally. So again, this is an album, so we do have side 1 and side 2. We spoke a little bit already about the first song on the album, Immigrant Song, which is the main single, the one everybody knows from the album, and it would be on any sort of Led Zeppelin greatest hits or anything.
Yeah.
So it's the one people are probably most familiar with, and on the radio as well. And I find it interesting because this album is mostly acoustic, and this is the furthest departure from that. And I think, like you said earlier, could be considered maybe their all-time hardest actual rock song, because it
definitely to date, because it wasn't blues. The other stuff they did was a heavier version of the blues, but this wasn't. This was something different. It was like I guess I'm trying to think of whatever really heavy albums would have come out around this time, and the only thing that's coming to mind is Black Sabbath, and I don't know.
I thought you'd say that.
I don't know how or if they would have crossed paths, but I mean that to me it's more comparable to that than even anything that they did, because it was just different.
Sure. Well, I think I read, and hopefully I'm right in saying this, that this song was either written or inspired by they had a tour in Iceland, and this is kind of where it kind of got that feeling, and you do have that. They do have this kind of like, they have a folksy feel, a rock feel, but there is always, the hammer, the gods.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And this is it. I mean, that lyric Viking, is in the tune.
The Viking quest, right?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that they had a tour in Iceland in the 70s. I mean,
or they just stopped there. I mean, it's probably one city.
I was gonna say, where else are you? No offense to anybody in Iceland, but other than Reykjavik, where else? I don't know any other cities that would have a major population where the Led Zeppelin's gonna go play.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
maybe it was a short tour. Who knows?
Yeah.
But so move on to the second track, and then this is our first kind of I don't know, exposure to the acoustic part, but we have Friends.
And I like this
And-
because you already mentioned this was one that they wrote together, or at least Page and Plant at Brawny Orr,
Yep.
which I think that part's really cool. But yeah, you're right. It just dives right into the acoustic part and kind of completely changes its tune, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's looking at all the other acoustic songs on the album. I feel like this one's actually very different. This one has a much darker feel to it. And even the opening strumming, it says that they used, and this means nothing to me, but a C6 chord open tuning.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that doesn't really mean a whole lot to me, but it does have especially it seems to be that bottom chord has a real just kind of loose, like an open tuning, a real loose kind of muddy feel, the way it rings out, you know?
Well, now that you mention that, that does sound like an open chord because you can't you can't get that kind of resonance and that sort of sustain with a barred chord or something, and it does make sense because a lot of his stuff, he used alternate tunings, and I remember being a kid trying to figure out some of that stuff. And if you weren't playing like the blues stuff that they had, I mean, there was so many songs of theirs where you're like, I cannot get it to sound right, but it's because you did not have that tuning.
Sure. Yeah. Well, then that actually, it transitions and seems to transition pretty seamlessly right into Celebration Day, which is not an acoustic track, and the song to me, it really moves. It has kind of a driving guitar, a good chorus. I can't say the lyrics are overly deep. It's just it's
a rock song. I mean,
yeah, it's a standard rock song. Has a real upbeat guitar solo. Just a good song. I can't say anything like stands out about it.
Mm-hmm.
Then we move on to probably one of the
singles.
Songs.
I think the B side of Immigrant Song.
Single, sure. Yeah. The longest song on the album. It's over 7 minutes. So over 7 minutes, I think so.
Yeah.
And they're the biggest blues song on the album, and it actually became a real staple for them in their live show. This is a song that they played for years and years and years, and really lets Page and Plant just both do their thing. I mean, Page, his guitar solo when playing he's playing, he's having fun, and Plant's vocals, he gets to show off his full range in this song. And it's impressive.
The unsung hero. I mean, John Paul Jones is just ripping the Hammond apart.
Right.
I mean, he some really good organ playing on that.
Yeah, and when I listened to this, Led Zeppelin has been the stories have been told of them in their wild kind of parties and with the ladies and everything. But man, this song probably got those guys laid a lot because it's a sexy song, man.
Yeah.
It is a sexy, sexy song. It's slow. It's driving. It has a great, great feel to it. And with Page, just some singers are singers, but some singers can scream, and he is a screamer. Like, there's guys like obviously Jim Morrison could do it. Chris Cornell, I think, was an amazing screamer. There's guys who can really scream and sound good, and he's able to do that in his song.
Yeah,
in this song, it's pretty great. Moving on to the next track, Grim.
Yeah, Out on the Tiles.
Out on the Tiles.
Again, just similar in stature to Celebration Day. I wouldn't say anything overly deep or philosophical, just kind of a rock song, just kind of living on the edge ish, I guess. The one thing that stands out to me about Out on the Tiles, and I caught on to this prior to ever listening to Led Zeppelin III, was the intro. It's a short couple bars of an intro before they get into the song. But if you ever listen to the Led Zeppelin live at the BBC album,
Disc 2, I believe.
Yep, they played the intro for Out on the Tiles into Black Dog. And I like Out on the Tiles, and I like Black Dog. But damn, when you put the two of those together, like, that shit was hot. I mean, that was like, it was so sweet. And I didn't, of course, hearing it at the time, I didn't know that was the intro to Out on the Tiles. And I was like, where can I find this version of Black Dog recorded? Because it's so good.
Right.
And then, of course, then you pick up the album and listen to the Zeppelin 3. Yeah, and it didn't do it. But I still like Out on the Tiles, but it didn't do it.
Right. Well, actually, I think I mentioned earlier that everybody kind of contributed to this album. John Bonham is the one who wrote Out on the Tiles. He's the one who came up with the idea for the riffs and everything that go through the track.
Wow, that's interesting, because I wouldn't have guessed that. It is a pretty sweet riff, actually. Taking the whole like BBC Sessions thing away from it, it is a really sweet riff, and it kind of goes into a lot of places. One of my favorite songs on the album, honestly.
Yeah. All right.
And a good song to end side one.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So let's move on to side 2, and we start off side 2, which is Gallows Pole, and that is actually I guess it's a cover from what I see. It's from the Maid Freed from the Gallows.
Yeah, well, yeah, I take that the way I've always understood that is it is more or less like a traditional folk song from the perspective of the person who's about to get hung for whatever they did. And they're saying what basically calling to everyone they know, like, can you help pull me from the gallows pole?
Right. Well, in kind of like you said, it is that folk song. And when I was listening to it the other day, I was trying to like think about how it made me feel and everything. And the image that came to mind, I could just see it just kind of being played at some kind of like country fair, like way back in the days. When people are like square dancing and just like having a good time.
the end part, and that's what's interesting about it, because I totally agree with you with the end of that song. Yeah, when the mandolin comes in and it's all kind of happy-go-lucky. But the interesting part is the beginning of that song is really dark and maybe desolate isn't the right word, but that's the word that's coming to mind, where it's just like, it's one guy and he is more or less the sentiment is like, how the hell am I going to get out of this?
Yeah. Well, and it is we really, I mean, there on the side one, there was, I guess you would call two acoustic songs. And then most of side 2, I think, is pretty much all acoustic. However, at the end of Gallows Pole, you do get an electric guitar, I don't know, solo, but an electric guitar does come in, and there was some real kind of fuzz to it. And it has a cool sound. I really like that. But again, building off this being more of an acoustic side or acoustic album, like this whole side, I believe, is more acoustic based in all the songs.
Well, sure, because then, I mean, without getting too into it, let's go. Tangerine is more or less acoustic based. That's the way.
Yep.
Brawny or Stomp,
or Stomp.
which I not to just brush over those ones. I mean, I think I think Tangerine might be the one that you're thinking about where it's an acoustic song and they come in with a really fuzzy solo because
They doing that one as well. Yeah. There is a fuzzy solo just at the end of Gallows Pole. It's very short, but there is something at the end where they just build off it. But yes, you're absolutely right. In Tangerine there is that.
And dude, that fuzz is just nasty in Tangerine
right?
too. I mean, it's one of those ones where I'm like thinking of what kind of equipment they had to do that then, and I'm like, God, that is some disgusting ass fuzz, especially for that era, because they didn't have access to all these guitar pedals and effects that we have access to very easily nowadays. I mean, hell, the wah pedal was relatively new at this time, and that's like, who doesn't have a freaking wah pedal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't.
Well, yeah, I realized I sounded like a real dickhead right there, but I'm just saying, as a guitar player, who doesn't have a wah pedal?
Yeah, I mean, it's like me saying who doesn't have a 70 to 200 millimeter lens? Like,
yeah, gross.
f2.8 baby. Yeah. So yeah, then we move on to That's the Way. Yeah, and for me, I love this song. Again, it is acoustic bass. This became another one of their live staples. So during their show, I think their live shows were known for being heavy and hard and
but then they drop it back.
Yeah. And then I think once this album came out, they were able to kind of throw it in, especially once there was this album and then Led Zeppelin IV. They would kind of break it down a little bit, an acoustic set, and That's the Way would be a part of it. Going to California would be part of it, and Brian.
Well, sure, because you got
would also be a part. Yeah,
you got John Paul Jones playing mandolin on those two songs. I mean, those two songs are set up. This one, That's the Way, and Going to California, from their perspective, are basically set up the same way.
Yeah, you don't even have to change instruments, really.
Yeah, I mean, everything's good to go. And it's interesting, and I don't know because I haven't read in detail, especially by any accounts of the band, who is much more credible than all these people who listen to the lyrics and are scholars, like which is what I'm about to go into right now. But I feel like this song is about racism if you listen to the lyrics, and I don't know, but that's just how it's always felt to me. And it's kind of touching because it talks about racism, but like through the lens of a child, where they don't see that and they don't understand that. It's just like, I can't play with you no more. Like, like you're my friend down the street, but I can't play with you anymore.
Yeah. My friend, the boy next door, I got to do what mama told me.
Yeah. And I don't know, I could be wrong with that, but if you look at it through that lens, it is really interesting.
Well, here's one line, that really, I think you could be interpreted. You're in the darker side of town.
Yeah. Well, sure.
Yeah.
And I think with that being, a prominent issue at the time, I mean,
yeah,
why wouldn't you write a song that kind of, I mean, maybe brings this to light in some sort of way, or at least kind of touches on it, because it doesn't make sense, and shit, especially from the perspective of a kid who has no basis in anything that it would have been founded in.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, I agree. I haven't read anything like that as well, but it does make perfect sense to me. It really does. And then we go on to another one of these songs from the, I guess we'll call the Bronny York cabin sessions, and that's Bronny York Stomp. Again, keeping the acoustic going, but what I love about it is the I don't know, it's the kick drum or what it is, but it just has that,
the
you know,
kick
that
drum with the
boom,
slide
boom,
guitar
boom.
just
Oh, that thump.
it's great.
You know, and one thing and I'm not sure if Zeppelin does this a lot and if they did it in previous songs, but one thing I really noticed in this song was doubling Plant's vocals gives it's a really nice touch, and I love when bands do that effectively. It just, to me, it adds another layer of depth to it, and when it's done right, it's really good.
No, that's a great point. And to be honest, his voice is typically so strong that I think you're right.
You don't need it.
Like, you hear it with a lot of bands, but I don't really notice it a whole lot with Zeppelin because his voice is so strong. And why the hell would you need to? But that's a really good point.
Thank you.
I think it does carry over really well.
Yeah. Well, then we go to the last song. And I know you're a big fan of this guy,
dude.
And he's not even in the band. My hat goes off to him.
Okay. Oh God. Can we just talk about Roy Harper for a minute? Because son of a bitch. I mean, like, dude, no wonder somebody wrote a song called "Hats Off to Roy Harper," because I think a lot of people didn't know who Roy Harper was.
No, definitely not. And this is 1970, and I have a feeling I know where you're going.
I think you do very well.
When did Pink Floyd's "Wish You Were Here" come out? What year was that?
I want to say 75. Without looking at it, I'm going to say 75. Okay. I can look at it, but I'm quite sure 75 is right.
All right, Wikipedia.
Let's see. Wish You Were Here.
Yep. September 12th, 75. You got it.
There you go. All right.
Dude, if I was there, I'd buy you a beer.
Well.
The next gin and tonic's on me, bro.
Yeah.
All right. But I think you should tell these fine folks a little bit about Roy Harper and his connection with Pink Floyd, in case people don't know.
Well, yeah. So little known, I think, to a lot of us, especially in the U.S., but I mean, he's an English folk rock singer. Now, he is released 32 albums on his own.
Jesus.
And he's known for playing a lot of different things, fingerstyle guitar being one of them. But he has been acknowledged by a number of bands who have just cited him as a big influence. And if I'm not mistaken, Roy Harper played, was it saxophone on Wish You Were Here?
I don't know. No, dude, have a cigar.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
Dude.
I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was thinking of someone totally different. Yeah, you're right.
I'm lobbing up a softball to you. And
dude, I know. There's a lot of information.
You need a refill. You need a refill, buddy.
So, yeah, you're right. So, okay. The dude
Continue.
sings "Have a Cigar" on Pink Floyd's "Wish You Were Here." Most people, I think that was either Waters or Gilmore in some sort of a stretch of their voice. But I mean, son of a bitch, they have Roy Harper sing "Have a Cigar," and then, consequently, 5 years prior to that, Led Zeppelin writes a song about him that's basically saying, like, Harper. This guy's awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
that's embarrassing that I really biffed that, but life goes on.
yeah, the podcast goes on. No, those are two.
Yeah,
two amazing compliments from if you get a band naming a song after you and another band saying, "Hey, we have this song. It's going to be pretty great. We need you to sing it." So.
And
he knocked it out of the park.
Dude, actually, that's one of their better vocal performances. And no, I mean, they're arguably one of my favorite bands ever. But I mean, yeah, I think his vocal performance on that song topped what either of the other two main singers could have pulled off. I really do. I mean, he just killed it.
Yep. So now that we have our hats off to him, the actual song itself,
Dude, awesome song. It's kind of like it's like blues on steroids a little bit. I mean, that slide guitar is just ripping throughout the whole thing, and Plant's vocals kind of have like a little bit of a bounce or a tremolo to them, and they sound really gritty, really gritty.
That's what I wanted to ask you, because to me it sounds like it has this shaky kind of pulse to it. That's the way I kind of thought of it. How did they do that? It's a really cool effect, and I can't say I've heard that before or heard it since. And it's
that's a good question.
Cool. You want to call up Paige and see how I did it?
I'd really love to, but I can only speculate. Nowadays it would be as simple as a plug-in. That's no problem. But at the time, my mind went to two places. One was running his vocals through an overdriven Leslie speaker, which is a Hammond organ, typically associated with a Hammond organ, because you can get this effect where the speaker spins around and it gives you this pulsating kind of chorus-like effect. But I'm going to say that probably wasn't it, because the Hammond organ effect is a little more circular, a little more smooth, and this one is, to me, it's more abrupt.
Yeah,
it's not smooth. It's quick. A little more it's a little more abrupt. Yep. So with that in mind, unless they had a tremolo pedal, which I don't know if they had that at the time, based on you know what kind of effects were released, it's possible that they may have run the vocals through like a Fender amplifier, which typically the Fender amplifiers had vibrato built into them, and you could adjust that, and you could have got that sound out of running a vocal through that amplifier.
Gotcha.
So I don't know, but that's what I'm leaning toward based on what I know was available to them at that time, for sure.
Great. No, hey, sounds good to me, man. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of the album here. So I hope you have your screwdriver ready. Would you like to do the honors?
Yeah, I will. And I think it's really going to surprise you.
Oh, man.
But for me, the scratch in the track that I can skip over every time listening to this album is the inevitable "Since I've Been Loving You."
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's just, to me, it's too long. It's too repetitive, and you can rip a guitar solo as much as you want, but it just kind of, it just kind of drags for me.
I gotcha.
Because like musically, it just kind of does the same shit over
for
and
7
over
minutes.
For 7 minutes, yeah.
Yeah. I can definitely understand that. I can understand, now that I think of it, when I do listen to the album, it probably is one of the ones I do skip. I probably also, to be honest, skip "Immigrant Song."
I could see that too. Yeah,
that's one that I skip, and I mainly blame that on pop radio. That's nothing.
Fair.
It's not because I don't think it's a good song or anything like that. I really do like it.
But what's your scratch track?
Of course, what is my scratch track? And to be honest, the jury's been out, man. I've been kind of going back and forth, and there's two songs that I'm really considering, and they're not ones that have been brought up in the past 2 minutes. And I actually think the one I might skip, and I believe you said it was one of your favorites on the album, is "Out on the Tiles."
Can understand that.
Yeah, for me, it was between "Out on the Tiles" and "Celebration Day." But there is something about Celebration Day that I like. I like how Friends kind of transitions right into Celebration Day. And not that this is any sort of a, concept seamless album where the songs flow into each other.
Sure.
But I always like it.
Sure.
I always like it when songs do that. So I
and
think,
those two do flow really well. I got to give you that.
Yeah, and this is
I can see that. For me, I like that. I love the intro, even though it's so simple, and I really love the riff. But yeah, I mean,
dude, if only the
your
intro went into Black Dog.
I mean,
man.
it's your screwdriver. I mean,
It's my festival, man.
Yeah.
It's my screwdriver. Let me ask you: are you using a flathead or a Phillips? I mean, if
Oh,
you're gonna
I would
scratch
definitely
record,
use a flathead and just rip it apart, dude.
Get
I mean,
really get in there.
yeah, I don't just want to like hear it and wait for it to go a couple revolutions and get over it. Like I actually want to pick up the needle and put it on the next one.
That's pretty great. I like it. It. Well, I think
It's
we
scratch a track, not nick
It
a
is.
track.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. That's a good point. Well, I think we've officially scratched out Led Zeppelin III, with Grimm going with Since I've Been Loving You, and myself selecting Out on the Tiles. No disrespect to the late, great John Bonham. But, well, that wraps up another fine week of Scratch Track presented by the Dude and Grimm Show. It's wonderful as always, Grimm. I can't wait to do it again. We will be
Likewise,
back soon,
dude.
everyone. Yeah, we will be back soon. We'll be back next week with another great album, I'm sure. And I'll drop a little hint. If you're feeling claustrophobic, or maybe you need some cherry-flavored antacids, well, you're in luck, my friends. You're in luck. So,
Pass it
signing
on.
off.
Keep listening.
Signing off.
Pass it
signing
on.
off the Scratch a Track by the Dude and Grimm Show. We'll see you soon. Happy scratching.
Scratch a Track is produced by the Dude and Grimm. Additional music provided by More. That's ... MORE and the Tims TIMNZ. Copyright 2020. The Dude and Grimm Show.
Well, I think I'm going away.